My name is Don Taylor, and I'm on the faculty of the School for Workers, also known as the Department of Labor Education here at UW-Madison. One item logistically is if there are any faculty or staff in the room who are not members of UFAS, United Faculty and Staff, there's literature on the front table up here that you can grab on your way out.
As well as a membership form.
As well as a membership form. Jane McAlevey is a fourth-generation union activist and has also worked in the community organizing and environmental justice movements. She's a former leader of the Service Employees International Union, and her time with SEIU roughly coincided with my own. While I worked for the union in New England, Jane led the local in Nevada, where she led the revitalization of the union and the development of breakthrough contract campaigns, winning industry-setting standards in healthcare. She earned a Ph.D. in June 2015 from the City University of New York's Graduate Center, studying with Francis Fox Piven. In September 2015, she began a postdoc at the Harvard Law School's Labor and Work-Life program. In July of this year, she was named a Senior Policy Fellow by UC Berkeley's Labor Center. Her work there focuses on leadership development and civic engagement with the education community in California. Her first book, Raising Expectations and Raising Hell, published by Verso, was named the most valuable book of 2012 by The Nation magazine. Her second book, No Shortcuts, Organizing for Power in the New Gilded Age, was published in the fall of 2016 by Oxford University Press. Adolph Reed Jr. called it a serious, grounded rumination on building working class power. Her forthcoming third book, due in early 2020 from Ecco HarperCollins, is called A Collective Bargain: Unions, Organizing, and the Fight for Democracy. Tomorrow evening, just so you know, Jane will be speaking with Wisconsin AFL-CIO President Stephanie Bloomingdale at 6:30 p.m. at the Madison Labor Temple on South Park Street on the topic, As Go Unions, So Go the Republic, the Labor Movement, and the Political Future. The subject of her talk today is On Power and Participation, and now I'm standing in front of it, Building Democracy in Uncertain Times. So with that, I have the great pleasure of introducing to you Jane McAlevey.
Thanks, Don. Thank you, Don. It is lovely to be here in the belly of the beast, as I like to think of it, in the last bunch of years. So I think I'm going to just dive right in, and I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes-ish, and then we'll have like 40 minutes-ish for actually discussion and Q&A and like that. And I think I'm going to, can you kill those front lights for me? I know, he's trying to do 20 things at once, but because the slides will matter, so hopefully you can see them from the back. I am going to, I'm going to actually try and use, I'm going to do like a little practicum, like a little crash course as fast as I can in what I think building high participation and organizing means. So that's the 40 minutes around the world as we go. Oh, turn that on, that's going to help. So Don's nice intro, all true, of course. But the fourth generation union thing, I'll just say quickly about my upbringing. Before I do that, anyone know what this is? Oh, I love these pop quizzes. So this is sort of a montage of my childhood. That's the 1970 Earth Day flag, actually the original 1970 Earth Day flag, the ecology flag it was called back in 1970, which my father, who was an elected politician, and I was his campaign baby thrown on the campaign trail. That's me, on the back of every bumper sticker in parts of New York. So I grew up the daughter of a left labor politician who was put into office by trade unions, which meant I spent most of my childhood on picket lines, posing for pictures with him to get reelected, with a lot of rank and file members, or, because my mother was dead from cancer, he would just park me in the Carpenters Union Hall, and I literally was raised in the Carpenters Union Hall, and I actually thought they were all my brothers. I had 6 actual brothers, but I thought I had like 300. So, so I grew up in the hall of Local 973, the United Brotherhood of Carpenters, really as a little girl. And then this weird thing happened, which is I started writing books. And the weird thing happened because I had to step out to fight the same cancer. It turned out that took my mother and everyone else, whatever. I never imagined in my whole life stopping organizing for like a minute. And then there's one reason why people who are super passionate about the work occasionally you can get grounded for reasons that you don't mean. So I did write that first book, actually, as a way to just process boring time in my life. And then there's a link between these two books, and it's Frances Fox Piven, for people who know her. Frances, I sent her the manuscript for this book, which I thought might just be a letter to my nieces and nephews. There's a lot of them. And she was like, actually, no, you're going to publish this now. And then next thing I knew, I had a book at Verso. So, and then that book got me into the Ph.D. program because I dropped out of undergrad and college, never graduated anything. And then somehow got the Ph.D., and that's the dissertation. So No Shortcuts was my dissertation, and because I studied with Frances, who, like the magnificent Eric Ollenwright, believed that people should write in fairly common English. And so I wrote my dissertation in common English. And it took no time to turn it into the book, like actually just a few months. So I recommend that for anyone doing academic work. I was persuaded not to write in language that people couldn't understand, because I was one of the people who couldn't understand things I wanted to when I read them. So Frances was a link to both, because she helped me produce the next one. That's the next book coming out in a couple of months. So let's get into the talk. I can't look at them for long with that Hi Hitler thing. Like, I always have to use that picture of Walker. It's like, hey, you know, in this crowd, I'll just say, even though one of them has gone to, like, we are definitely in a period, and to talk about this in Wisconsin seems almost just silly, so I can go fast on some slides. Like, we are in a period when these people have decided they're taking it all back, right? There's no nothing in between. They're taking it all. They've begun to do that here, right? They've literally dragged the standard of living down in Wisconsin just since 2010. In measurable ways, they've dragged the quality of life down. You can literally look at Wisconsin as an example of what happens when you kill unions in a short time clip. So they're not messing around, and I have very little patience for our side when we're not equally having, like, we're not messing around. Like, I'm not messing around, right? I feel like we, to like beat the people who have been beating the pulp out of the working class means we have to get really serious about the work. Right? How do they rule? They rule by, like, one thing that makes me crazy in the movement is like, wow, we're the 99%, like when I was at Occupy, because I was in grad school then, conveniently in New York. And I would go down there, and like, I love the slogan, but it doesn't matter if we're 99% if you can't manifest the 99% with structure and unity, right? So it's fine to have a theory that we're the majority, but organizing is about manifesting majorities and supermajorities, which is what I'm going to talk about. So, because there's clearly only about 1% of them, maybe even less. So they divide us. They divide us by worker, by sector, by country, by trade, by gender, by immigration status, and everything else. Their entire raison d'etre is just divide and conquer. And neoliberalism's strategy is cultivating individualism. Like, that's my, like, they have a strategy, and it's about smashing the idea of the collective, right? Which I think for about 45 years, I argued in the dissertation, or in No Shortcuts, was the unmaking of the working class. Like, the working class was made, and then it was crushed. Which to me, for all the flaws that American trade unions have, there are many. If you've read anything I've ever written, I've got plenty of my own critiques. I'm sticking with the union, because there is no other way around it. Like, that's my analysis, having worked in many sectors in the progressive movement in the US, environmental justice organizing, political organizing, community organizing, anti-imperialist solidarity work, and I'm never leaving the labor movement, because we actually have the most capacity to build power, for reasons I'm going to talk about today, quickly. And so I think it isn't that we only need unions, it's that we can't do it without unions, right? It's not that they're not the only thing we need, but they need to be seen as the bedrock and the foundation of the house of power in a progressive movement in the US. Like, that's the life argument, and the argument I made in No Shortcuts, and that I'm definitely making in the new book. So, okay, who cares, right? This crowd does not need more evidence. Doesn't matter what we do. That's after the tax cut, when you're supposed to share all that money with the working class, and then, of course, they didn't. Surprise! Hey, are you surprised? After the 2017 tax cut, they didn't share the money. Okay, so, and then we have the Janus decision, right, which just sort of cements Wisconsin and helps take it national. And for people who didn't ever read the beginning of the ruling, in the Janus ruling, that said the entire country in the public sector now is what we call right to work, right? No one has to join, no one has to stay. They started that in Wisconsin in 2011. But to me, the single most telling part of the entire decision, besides the dissent, is the opening language of the majority, where they say, whatever may have been the case 41 years ago when Abood, right, the case that they used to overturn in the Janus ruling in 2018, when Abood was decided, it is thus now undeniable that labor peace can readily be achieved through less restrictive means than the assessment of agency fees. Translated to, when in the public sector there were a lot of massive strikes going on, which was in the 60s and 70s, we won the Abood ruling, right? The context for the U.S. Supreme Court, the Supreme Court does not make rulings in a vacuum, like that's for sure. There was a lot of upheaval going on. And in the private sector, there was a new wave of strikes happening, and definitely in the public sector, there was a massive wave of strikes happening. And so to get labor peace, they sort of institutionalized unions by creating the agency fee, which we could have a long argument about. I'm not getting into it right now, about is that good or bad. But what we know is when we have strikes that are huge and create a crisis for corporations and capital and the elite, we actually get concessions. The question of how we learn to maximize those concessions and keep going is a much longer debate. But so I think what's happened is that there's been far too little strikes in this country, and so we've been rolled back and back and back and back. So just a quick reminder here, the NLRA became law. Like how we got the National Relations Act was because of massive strikes both before and after the passage of the NLRA. When I was doing research for the book that's coming out, I thought, I'm an organizer. How did I not know enough about the 33 and 34 strikes? The strikes that were happening in 1933 and 1934 are far more interesting to me in some ways than what we know a lot more about, which is the sit-down strikes in 36, right? Like that's the labor history we're taught, New Deal, Detroit strikes. But actually it's the strikes that led to the crisis that gave FDR the space to actually pass the National Relations Act, just like Selma and a lot of direct actions during the Civil Rights Movement were giving the space to LBJ to actually pass key pieces of legislation. So the same kind of thing was happening in the early 30s. And I'm going to skip over some of this because I want to actually get to the organizing slides. So high participation is a prerequisite to power. That's what I was taught by smart mentors and what I practice and what I believe. So this is where we go to the 99% thing, right? How do you actually make it happen? So you don't just need to say like, hey, there's a lot of potential people. You actually have to have unity against division. You have to have a really tight, effective workplace structure. And you have to have demonstrable and sustainable majorities, and then I'm going to argue supermajorities in terms of numbers. So it's high participation plus this gets us to the kind of victories we just saw in Chicago, Los Angeles, and other places. And I'm sure people here are aware that we are having the largest number of workers on strikes that we've had in 30 years, and it's, thank God, or whatever it is out there. But like, we gotta go, we need so much more of what we're doing. So, but it's happening. And our job, I hope everyone in this room, along with me, is committed to like making more of it happen. So just the pretty pictures, you know, West Virginia, totally illegal strike, 100% out, 34,000 workers. Not just teachers, super important point I make in the new book coming out. It's not just teachers, it was also the bus drivers and the cooks. And I've written several stories in the Nation and Jacobin that talk about how I actually don't believe West Virginia, which started this new round of people saying we're going to walk off the job, West Virginia wouldn't have happened without the bus drivers, because there would have been legal injunctions against the teachers if it was just the teachers. It was the refusal of the bus drivers to pick kids up that left them on the sides of the roads in rural America that they were freaking out about, that the superintendents of schools were then closing schools because they were afraid a little kid would get run over on the side of the road, and then that's on the superintendent. So just thinking about industrial power and who has power, that very first strike that really led to, that raised people's expectations that they could strike and win, had a lot to do with old-fashioned sort of industrial theories of power, which is all the workers out together, which they'd never done before. There used to just be teacher strikes in West Virginia. So, and then April, okay, and then, woo, private, ooh, okay, so first, private sector, right? There's a whole thing going on, public sector, education strikes 2018, and the academic quarters and the policymakers and skeptics were like, yeah, but, it's not gonna hit the private sector. Thank God for Unite Here. Okay, so they hit the private sector, right? So 7-city strike by Unite Here, Marriott, they do what most of the academic literature, for me as a late in life Ph.D., most of the academic literature that I found and fought with in classes between 2010 and 2015 said the following, basically. Structural constraints mean that low-wage immigrant workers can't fight multinational corporations anymore via strikes. Just saying that. Okay, there it is. Okay, so 34,000 in the streets of LA. Very important. We can come back to it later if you're interested. But like that level of strike readiness enabled them to break what's called mandatory subjects of bargaining. And under labor law, there's mandatory and permissive labor law subjects. And the strike was so powerful that it allowed them to force a number of issues like the Green New Deal, ending random searches in the schools, creating an immigrant defense fund to be financed by the school district. There were a lot of things that came out of the strike that were not just shrinking class size, raises, not two-tiering the healthcare plan. There's a lot of things that came out of the strike because of the amount of power that they built. Then it hit Stop and Shop. This would not be a case study of most of what I'm talking about, but it's nice to see. Meaning it wasn't a result of deep organizing. It was a result of a sort of moment where people were like, shh, got no choice, let's just go. What it showed us, I think, in the Stop and Shop strike was the ready and willingness of workers to walk off the job. The anger level is so insane right now. And in addition to that, there was an amazing level of human solidarity that broke out among and between the trade unions in New England over that strike. There was a sense in New England that the union actually wasn't ready for it. They weren't that prepared. I'll say it nicely. They didn't really know what they were doing, sort of, kind of. They hadn't had a lot of strike experience. And the Massachusetts AFL-CIO, which is one of the most together state federations of labor in the country, like they have good leadership and a good operation, like put out an, oh my God, all hands on deck, we can't let the strike fail. And people really threw down. Like unions that have been warring for years, just like threw their organizers into the fight. Everyone jumped in. That's the untold story of Stop and Shop that I'll probably write about at some point, but feel free to beat me because I don't have enough time. But to me, the most interesting part was that huge labor solidarity broke out around that strike, and that matters. It's an insight for the rest of us, right? That if we can get the leadership to stop fighting and actually agree, we can win against a tough employer. AT&T, okay, there you go. So now I just get into it. So 5 core concepts. This is what I write about, no shortcuts, and what I practice in real life. So one is, I'm a big believer in what I call structure-based organizing. It's what I do. It's what most union organizing is. And I contrast that with what I call self-selecting, mostly activist work. So structures are workplaces. They're your base of your organization. They could be a church, a mosque, a temple, a synagogue. They could be a housing complex, neighborhood development. They could be a political precinct. They could be a school. And I don't mean if you're a teacher, I mean if you're a parent, just, although teachers are parents. But they could be your school, the PTA. Any place where people come together and are in some bounded, regular relationship. Bounded constituency, some regular relationship. Even if they don't have a lot of time to talk to each other, like, you show up at these places, there's someone who lives above you, sits in that pew, works in that workstation. So there's structures which allow us fundamentally to measure whether or not the work we're doing is successful or not. That's what I mean by structure-based environments, which I contrast with self-selecting, which is a lot of activist work. So self-selecting work, and it's not, by the way, this is not a judgment, it's just one gets us more power than the other, both are needed. Both are needed, one builds power faster. So self-selecting, a lot of single issue environmental fights, the Women's March, Occupy Wall Street, all those things that categorize like single issue fights. The distinguishing feature is people who come to participate in them already agree with each other. That's why I call them self-selecting. People are self-selecting into those organizations and out of the base that's around them. In structure-based environment, I'm not selecting into the work I do. If I'm a nurse in a hospital, I need a job, and the boss hires me. And now I have this new group of people that I relate to that I didn't self-select into. I got hired by a boss, and now I work there. So that's the contrast, the core difference between self-selecting and a workplace specifically structure, or public housing organizing, which I've done in my life too, where I'm not sure people choose to live in the public housing they live in a bunch of American cities where we still have them. It's a cheap, affordable place to live, and you're going to live there. And you may like your neighbors or not, but if you're going to try and save one when they come to demolish it, you're going to build a structure to try and save it. So that's the big contrast. So that's concept one. And for me, it's about building majorities. If I'm an organizer trying to build power and I want to get to 100% out strike, I have to have a measurable way to understand, is the work we're doing succeeding or not? So that's a big first concept. Second concept is leaders versus activists, what I call the organic leaders in No Shortcuts, or in my dissertation, because I had to give them a name. In the work I practice, people who train me would just call it leader identification, leader ID theory, and organizer speak. For the book, I call it organic leadership to distinguish it from other kinds of leadership, like charismatic leadership, or I don't want to do a whole academic thing, but I had to give it a name to distinguish it from something else. So, but I argue, I experienced first, then I argued, right? 20 years in the field, then into academia. So I argue that organic leadership and the methods I was taught as a young organizer, what we're measuring when we're looking for the organic leaders are high capacity players in the workplace. And activists, and what most community-based organizations, environmental organizations, and unions that don't win, that's a big category, confuse commitment for leadership. So capacity versus commitment is leaders versus activists, like in shorthand. Then I say the next core concept is, are we building majority and supermajority participation or minority participation, by which I do not mean people of color in Milwaukee. I mean numbers of people. The fourth concept, which I will not have much time to do today, though it's such a good extension of what Eric Olnwright used to write about with associational power. Everything I'm talking about has to do with Eric Olnwright's discussions about associational power way back, but I didn't know that, but just saying that. Putting it out there, in case we want to have that discussion later. So, whole worker organizing versus community labor alliances. Again, also something I practiced a lot first and then began to write about and theorize about, is, do we have a bottom-up approach to the broader community that matches a bottom-up approach to the workplace? Fundamentally, I'm arguing that when we do a bottom-up approach where workers engage their own community to build alliances, we win more than what's very typical of 90, I'm going to say 98%, 95, be safe, percent of the American labor movement. Like, if they think about the community in any systematic way, they go write a check to a local church or write a check to a local United Way or whatever it is, and it's a top-down relationship, right? Head of union meets head of group. Shakes hands, photograph, newsletter, press conference, that's it. So whole worker organizing, which I'll show you just a picture of, I think, is a bottom-up approach to how we build power. And for me, all of that is what adds up to, are we organizing or are we mobilizing? And the argument in the dissertation was that for 45 years we've been mostly mobilizing. And because we post notifications for meetings and they're open, people can have a protest, people think that means we're organizing, but we're not. Unless we're doing a bunch of the stuff that I'm going to rip through in our little organizing tutorial now. So organizers and organizing are very deliberate. It's very deliberate, right? We have to spend most of our time talking with, not at, engaging the people who actually aren't talking to us, and we have to have a credible plan to do it every day. That's, to me, the difference between being an organizer and being an activist. So the key to it is organic leaders, right? The thing I was talking about, which I'm going to get more into right now, is understanding who's an organic leader among the base versus who's an activist. And there's a method, and the method I talk about in the book and practice a lot, and it's called Organic Leader Idea and Structure Test. So I'm going to get through at least that before I stop. About 20 minutes, yeah. So I want to show you a real campaign that I ran in the last couple of years. This is the biggest hospital organizing campaign in the United States, I think since the one I did in Nevada, but it was in Philadelphia in 2016. We succeeded at organizing 7 hospitals from the ground up across the city and almost took the city union in 12 months. So I'm going to walk you through one hospital campaign. This is, how many people here have seen big wall charts? How many people here have used big wall charts? Okay, great. Someone want to do it? No, I'm kidding. I'll do it just to save time. But that's good. It's better than average. Good job. Although most haven't, sadly. So I'm going to run through it. So this, to me, is just a metaphor for what we need to do, like to kick out Trump, to take the country back. But I'm going to walk you through one hospital campaign. So I was trained by 1199 New England. That's an old traditional arm of an old radical union in America that still holds the same principles they had in 1947. So this is what we call a big wall chart. And this is, the hospital is Einstein. This is the SICU unit, surgical intensive care unit. So it's one unit in one hospital. If you're in an organizing campaign, you have a wall chart for every department, every work area where people work together. And we start by putting the name of every single worker who works in that unit. Not every worker who shows up at a meeting, not every worker whose name someone gave us. We don't actually make the wall charts until we think at least we have all the names in that unit. So this is the morning shift and the PM shift, 2 shifts, registered nurses. And then once we have all the workers' names on the chart, we begin to set out to figure out, can we build a majority among the workers in that unit? And we're doing that, by the way, generally simultaneously throughout the whole hospital. So Einstein is easy for me to teach because I'm terrible at math, and there's 1,000 nurses, so I can usually do math off 1,000. So getting to supermajorities in every department, every big department early on in the campaign, that's our goal. They had 18 union busters in this hospital against us, 1-8. So when people get into a debate with me about, do we need professional organizers in the American labor movement, can't the rank and file just rise up and do it all? My answer is no. Happy to have that debate here, or not, because it misses that there's professional union busters who are out to kill the workers. So if we didn't have professional union busters in America, then we wouldn't need organizers. Then it would be fair and we would have unions. But we have these vicious players called professional union busters who know what the hell they're doing. And so there better be someone else who's helping the workers understand what they're doing to them and how they can beat them. So there were 18 from IRI Inc. I tell the whole story I'm about to show you in the forthcoming book. It's one of the longest chapters because it's easy to write because it's the campaign I was running. So here's the SICU. So every worker's name is up there, and then you can start to see the coding. If there's a blue dot next to their name, they sign the union authorization card. If there's a green dot next to their name, they signed a public petition. That would be public, saying they're going to vote yes for the union. If there's a red dot next to their name, it means they signed a public petition saying, boss filed legal charges against us, okay, we won the election, and they filed charges against us. I know that's shocking for people who know about unions. So they wouldn't come to the bargaining table, they wouldn't certify the union, so we were going into a war. We were in a war. There's like class war in a war. The yellow dot meant that they filled in the contract action survey. The last one I'll tell you about because they're all different codes. But the yellow across their name, this chart is about 4.5 months into the campaign. So you can see how many structure tests we're doing and what period of time. So 4.5 months, that many structure tests. I live for structure tests. The yellow highlight across their name means that at that point they had signed the union membership card. We had won the election, although we still hadn't certified the union because they were fighting us legally. But we decided to roll anyway and move the union membership card. So that means they're ready to pay dues and they've joined. So this is labor and delivery, a different department, same hospital, same time period. And if you look at the difference between labor and delivery, it's not quite as good looking as SIPU, right? It's a little uneven. You've got more people holding out and actually not participating in the campaign at all. You've got unevenness happening, like they're doing 2 of the structure tests, some are doing 1 or the other. What the hell just happened? Woo! That'd be bad timing. Oh, good, thanks. Stay with me. Oh, no, there we go. Cutting ahead. Oh, no, where are we going backwards? Oh, no. Okay, labor and delivery. So not quite as good, but, not bad. If you're an organizer, that's not bad. Now you got a little sneak preview of those 2. Anyway, so what's happening in that department? Same picture, same time. Same exact time in the campaign. What does anyone think is happening in that department?
Somebody's told them not to do.
Yeah. Who do we think?
Labor luster or something?
Yeah, but for the purpose of the workers, right? It's a good answer, because most people say, oh, you don't have the organic leader, or there isn't one. The truth is, there is one, and she's running the anti-union campaign in her department.
Sure. So
that's it. And her name is not locked out, because I wrote a book chapter about her, and she's perfectly happy for me to talk about her now. That's Marnay Payne on the day shift. So Marnay, in fact, is the organic leader in telemetry. A unit of 66 workers. Telemetry people look at the wires that we're all connected to in a hospital, and when the beeping goes off, the running comes from their team. So they're locked behind walls. They don't relate as much to the rest of the nurses. But so they were solidly anti-union. And we had this person named Liz Miller right here. You can see she was doing everything. And Liz Miller is our classic super happy activist who came to every meeting, who loves the union, who was ready to go. Just let's go, form a union. I've been waiting for you people. And Liz couldn't get anyone to do anything in the whole unit because, in fact, she didn't have the same kind of respect that the actual organic leader, Marnay Payne, did. So this is part of why I'm writing a whole book chapter about it, is because it was such a good case study, really clear case study. And if you get where I'm going with this, it's a metaphor for our progressive movement. Like, all we do is talk to Liz, look who's in power. That's all I'm saying. We'll get there. So, because Liz is amazing. Love her, she's fun, she plays guitar, she sings. She has feminist stories about when they, told the boss one day they weren't coming in skirts anymore and they were taking off their cute nurse outfits and wore pants. But that didn't relate to any single person that she worked with. A bunch of younger African-American nurses in Philadelphia years later. And so great, Liz came to the meetings and nothing ever changed. And then in exactly 2 hours, when Marnay Payne changed her mind and decided that she was going to finally join up with her coworkers to try and win an amazing contract, in literally less than 2 hours, she signed up every single worker on shift. That's what no union organizer on planet Earth can ever do, which is why our method is about identifying organic leaders, focusing on them, because then they can actually do all the rest of the work in a workplace and in American society. Just putting that out there. So that happened in less than 2 hours. And in the meeting when she changed her mind, which we can talk about later, she literally counted like this on her fingers when she understood the assignment, counted to 34, and knew exactly that there were 34 people between the day shift and night shift if she went in at shift change, and signed everybody up, and did. And they'd become the first 100% majority department within a matter of days. They beat every other department to 100% majority on cards. This would be my obsession with organic leaders and why they matter and why they're the key to the work that we do. And this is all very open, just want you to see it. This is a bunch of the worker leaders working on their wall charts, right? They're all coming to their meetings and they're figuring it out, and that's like getting ready for negotiations. I think they've got their binders out for the first time. So what are the structure tests? The structure tests are not done using social media or digital platforms. Every structure test I do, including this, is 2016. My biggest fight when I got there after being in grad school for 5 years was when I walked in to start working with the 18 organizers on this expanding team to organize the city. And I asked people where the wall charts were, and they were like, oh, hey, old lady, like, we have computers now?
Yeah.
We have databases. And I was like, that's so cute. Everyone's going to shut the campaign down until you build your wall charts. That took a week. So, and then we actually started to really shift the dial, right? But battling the use of digital everything is like real, I feel like, in the organizing world. So I don't allow any digital, like anything. We could text for turn in at a rally, but like this work happens by hand, whether it's 2019, 20, or 1919 in my opinion. So this is an example of a structure test. It's a hand-signed petition. They're always very simple languages. Hand-signed petition, 8,000 workers, 5,000 on there. Not quite a supermajority, but getting close to it. And they're hand-signed because we want the workers to do, there's so many reasons why we do endless structure tests. One is to assess, is the leader you think the leader is the leader? Can they actually do what Marnay did? Get the whole unit signed up in an hour. If so, you probably got the leader. Then you have to increase the risk factor on that leader and see, can she hold them as the risk is getting higher in the campaign and the fear is growing? Because it's one thing to know if someone can get a lower level ask done versus a higher level ask. And since I was raised to build strike-ready unions, strike being the highest order of business, 100% out strike, ain't no one who says, yeah, I'll go with you, who's never signed a petition, they're not going with you. So we do endless structure tests to help us identify, is the leader really the leader? Do we have the correct identification of the leader? Is the leader actually on board and doing the work? Labor and delivery, that was the problem. Leaders weren't doing the work. We had the right leaders, but they weren't that committed. So that's diagnostic number 2. And mostly what they're doing is giving an excuse to workers to have constant conversations with their coworkers. Constant conversations. This society and digital media is breaking down human communication. Organizers' jobs is to build it up. Face-to-face, all the time, organizing conversations. So we have to build and construct community every day in campaigns.
What's UMC stand for?
University Medical Center.
Okay.
Just a place. I mean, it was a big hospital. Right. Years back. And here's another one. So it's life as a structure test, I say. Bunch of nurses who had done their first majority petition getting ready to march on the CEO. By the way, one of many things about structure tests is we're also socializing workers to take risk. So when they begin to march on the CEO, they're beginning to, I think Frances Fox Piven, I think my academic side would say, I don't know what she would say, something about throwing off the chains of constraints or something. But anyway, it's like we would say we're socializing people to take risk. We're having people who are used to being obedient disobey authority. So this is from the Einstein campaign I showed you, right? It was their first supermajority petition. That was all of them. It was curling up, it was so big, but that was all of them getting ready on a lunch break, their 15 minutes of lunch break time, about to run up and deliver their first majority petition to the CEO. And there were like 15 security guards like 20 seconds later.
Oh, yeah.
But, and then this is what an example, this is an example of,
Here it is.
this is an example of, that's an example of photo poster that's increasing the risk threshold, right? So signatures to photo posters, if you were hiding behind your signature, hoping the boss wouldn't read it, but most workers actually think the boss will get a magnifying glass, and they do. This is a higher risk factor, and in fact, you know you're not hiding your support for the union if your picture's on the poster. That's a majority photo poster. I practice something called big open negotiations. That's me during a caucus of negotiations. I believe every worker has the right to attend negotiations, and for me that's a structure test. We try and get every worker in the room at least once during contract negotiations. Not for the whole day, but like for an hour. Like come in and like sit down in the back of the room and see what's going on in negotiations. Negotiations. This is Philadelphia. I'm wrapping now. I'm going to do the last concept if I can, which is whole worker organizing. It's going to make it. It's going to make it. It's going to make it. Too many connections of cords.
Yeah.
Come on, baby. I think you got most of it already. You want to play with that? Pete, do you want to play with those chords? It might work. Or anyone who wants to play with the chords? I want to show you these. So you get the point, but sometimes it's just holding them. I don't know, it's because there's too many connections. So we have to hold it like that. Well, I'll do a pop quiz. Did anyone guess what they were looking at? Like one more big Eric Olin-Wright concept.
Like a negotiating session?
Yeah, those are all negotiations. Just trying to unplug it and plug it back in.
Do I go on this computer?
Can. Yeah, you can. Pull it out. Did anyone notice what kind of room that was?
It's a hotel room, was it?
What was it?
The church?
Yeah, just slide into it. So the picture of those big negotiations that I was leading in Philadelphia starts to move into the last big concept of the whole worker organizing. So thank you, Pete, by the way, thanks. I just got up and grabbed and stealing. And it says Haven's right presentation. Once you've got the workplace in really good shape, or once we've got the workplace in good shape, meaning everything looks a bit like SICU, we've conquered telemetry, we've got high participation, high solidarity, high trust, a lot of structure tests are done. It's at that phase in my own practice for the last 2 decades where we then move into intentionally building the plan to move the community into the campaign. Because the work is so personal for people that if you try and do that work on the front end of the campaign before high trust is built, it's going to fall apart. Imagine someone walking up to you who you don't know well and saying, hey, what church do you and your family go to? Like, that's not an opening conversation with a worker. Once the trust is built and the workers understand the trajectory of the campaign because they're participating in it and they're helping to build their own campaign, then people get, okay, now it's time to bring our whole community in. We're going to chart every organic connection we have to the broader community. Then at that point, you can actually have that kind of conversation and begin to move into the campaign. Ooh, that's hard. That's good. Is it there?
I think this is still in this one. Is that your background? Oh, here we go.
Yeah, we want to be on here, right?
Okay, which one is this one?
We want to be, that's not my desk, let's see.
This computer's not working.
This computer's not working.
This computer's not working.
No, well, I'm going to give up. No, that's okay, thanks. Boy, it would have been terrible to not
Do
make
you want to
it.
try another laptop?
No, I don't think it's worth it. I'm going to just try one more time and see if I can get it going. But otherwise, you've got the,
There you go.
yeah, temporarily. Thanks. Thank you so much. I'm going to go, watch me go fast through some pictures. So yeah, there we are. That's the Einstein nurses. Thank you, Pete. That's the Einstein nurses. 2016. They finally win. We finally beat the crap out of the employer. Ask me about that later. Forced them to drop their legal charges, which they would never have done if we hadn't killed them, which we did. And that, by the way, is a structure test too. That was Chicago. I just want to show you, this is just 2 weeks ago in Germany. I'm working in Germany right now. This is 1,122 nurses out of 1,614. It's in German, don't ask me what it says. It's Verity, but it's their first structure test trying photos in an escalation of a campaign, and days later we just won the best single nurses contract in the history of Germany. That's a new standard in Germany. So the last one I was going to say is just to show you the community campaign. This goes, again, it's like sitting around Eric Olnrein all day. It's like, this is all about constructing associational power. So in the phase of the campaign where I said the trust is built, then we start to ask, you put each worker in the middle of this grid and begin to map and analyze, they do this themselves, every connection they have. Their faith, their spouse, if they have a good relationship, we can chart their spouse's connections. If they have a good extended family, a lot of immigrant workers do, and not just immigrant, but we can chart their extended family too. Immediate neighbors, local businesses, adult clubs, book clubs, reading clubs, knitting clubs. They have kids' sports teams. I always say the biggest waste of opportunity in America is like how many parents stand around with young kids who kick the ball in the wrong direction, help the other team win, and never talk about the union crisis going on. So there's like so much time standing on sidelines. So all of these are places that we begin to aggregate and look for links between the workers and the community, and between the community members who are in different institutions that have more power. So the workers are working a bottom-up strategy to attack the structures of power around them through their associations in the community. We use a very simple multi-language approach to it when we're doing it to help the workers learn how to have the conversations with each other. We're also doing something called power structure analysis, which is the same thing as leader ID, but in the broader community. And I'm not going to get into this because I want to have time for discussion, and I'm almost at the time I want to stop. But this is a power analysis, which is leader identification theory, just in the community. And on the right-hand side, when I do this work, is always the boss's agenda. Up there, that's the boss. Sources of good are always on the left. And then the vertical plotting of power is telling you how much power you have, not on the radar. You don't have much power. Get attention, take it into account, power to have influence, active participant, decisive. And then we're measuring each institution in the community 2 ways. By ideological commitments, and then by how much power they have. So we've already done that in Philadelphia, concurrent to the organizing project, because we're at that phase where like we got to win and we need more power than we have in the workplace. So just remember that slide in the BPMC. So this is just one slide of 300 of the community power structure, but it's a slide about faith power in Philadelphia. And I'm going to close basically with this story. So I've got a team of researchers doing the community power analysis, some engagement with the workers, but they merged at a key point in the campaign, and this is where they were merging. They're off doing some power analysis work. I borrowed Canadian trade union researchers. We had no money on the campaign, no money. So all the unions I was training in Canada, I was like, hey, I'm not coming to Canada all year. If you want your people trained, send them to me for free, and you pay, and I'll train them. So they did, so that was great. So we had a bunch of extra researchers coming from Canada because they wanted to learn this. And then we're doing the power structure analysis presentation to 300 newly unionized nurses across 7 hospitals, because it's that stage of the campaign. We got to win. And we're building citywide consciousness among the nurses. You don't just work for an employer, you work for employers. They get together, time for you to get together. And as we're making the presentation, and we're on that slide, by the way, the union leadership thought no worker would want to sit through a 4-hour meeting on power. Just want you to know that. Which I'm always like, really? Whoever explains how power works to a registered nurse, they love it. So, so on this slide, where Joyce Rice, who I'm now showing you, where Joyce Rice, who's a labor and delivery nurse, right here, is standing next to Cheryl Parker, one of the most powerful Black City Council members in Philadelphia, because we had the nurses going out in teams to meet with every single faith leader, politician, everyone, forcing them to put in writing that they standed with the workers against the CEO, demanding you drop the charges, blah, blah, blah. And Joyce, who I've known at this point in worker meetings, raises her hand in the middle of this big meeting with a bunch of workers, and she says, Jane, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I know you want to get through the power slides. And I was like, oh, whatever, Joyce. And she goes, look, I wasn't sure, but I thought I did know the answer. So apologetic. I didn't mean to be looking at my phone. But I thought that my minister was just elected to the head of the BPMC, but I wasn't sure. But I thought I saw it in the church newsletter. So Anyway, I just texted him and I said, Pastor Jones, are you the head of the Black Pastors Ministers Coalition of Philadelphia? And he wrote back and he said, yes. And he said, why do you want to know? And then I told him I'm meeting with a bunch of nurses, and he said he'd love to meet the nurses. Why don't you cover next week? And you can't make this shit up. One of the most powerful people in the entire city, the strongest associational tie, is sitting in the labor and delivery department. So everyone's trying to figure out, how do we get to the most powerful players in the city to put pressure on the CEOs? And the most powerful people in the city are sitting in front of us in the rank and file. But unless and until we actually help them connect the dots to how much points of power they have in the broader society, they don't get it. So in that teachable moment in the room with a bunch of union leaders around and other people, I said, oh, Joyce, so glad you interrupted me. Feel free, more of that, feel free. Every time you see a face up here, you know, please interrupt all day long. And then I said to Joyce, before I leave you, Joyce, I said, so you've been in this like hell fight against IRI Inc. for 4.5 months in your hospital as a leader on the negotiations team. Has it ever occurred to you to talk to Pastor Jones before about what was going on at work? And Joyce said, no. That's what organizing is about. And I said, why? And she said, it just never occurred to me. Like, unless we help people connect the dots, they're busy, they got a life. Workplace fight, I'm going to church to relax. Whatever it is you're doing. Organizing is partly about helping people connect the dots in their lives to power. And you can see that we began to methodically, right, we were tracking every single nurse. So this is the point where they're mapping each other's relationships. And we're going mother, baby, medical intensive care unit. Like, we're going right through every single worker in each hospital and having them begin to map their own relationships to their community. And in every single unit, among every single nurse, with a union leadership that told me, you know, Jane, when you did nursing home work and low-wage immigrant work, those workers are religious, but nurses aren't. The amount of things that come out of people's mouths are just astounding. But no different than academics tell me low-wage workers can't fight a multinational corporation, right? So part of doing this work is about getting past assumptions and actually having a theory on how to plow through. Because most union leaders will say things to me like, nurses aren't religious. And I'm just like, really? Because have you asked them, actually? Have you asked them in a way that's going to make sense to them? That puts their own agency into the campaign about why they're going to start to open up and talk to you about their faith, which otherwise doesn't make any sense, like some random conversation about faith. So anyway, that's it. That's it. So let's chat. Is it this one?
One on the right.
Thanks. So any questions?
I was curious, did you find organizing much easier in Germany? I would think it would, and also, how do you do that if you don't know the language?
Definitely not easier.
It's not.
No, not anymore. Nope, the whole neoliberal attack is on worldwide. American union busters have moved into German companies. And even worse than that, the Nazis are organizing in the plants right now. The AfD is in the plants contesting for control of the works councils. Not a very public discussion in Germany, but it's starting. So no. And I'm not actually doing the direct organizing, although I have met a lot of the workers. I'm coaching and training teams of German organizers right now. And then the campaign in what they call the Far East, which is the German-Polish border, is so scary right now that the Germans hired someone to translate my book last year, which has led to a lot of work in Germany. And the book translator, lovingly to me, thanks to the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, has been funded to travel around with me wherever I go. So he knows the words I'm using, the concepts I'm using. And then the team of German organizers I'm working with, most of their English is good enough that they're fine too. So I actually have had the pleasure now of walking into rooms where, like, I'm teaching the organizers wall charting, I'm teaching them structure tests, I'm teaching them how to have effective conversations. And then I showed up in May at these big worker meetings on the Polish-German border and walked into a room that looked just like any room that organizing would have produced here, where the walls were covered in wall charts in a 4,000 worker hospital in Jena. And there were workers up working on their wall charts, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven, and they're the ones who just won a standard-setting contract in Germany. So it definitely works across borders, right? Yes?
So I'm wondering, you just returned from Chicago, right?
No,
Oh, you didn't go?
no, I was gonna go, but then the whole trip
Oh, right,
got all
right, right.
upended. But
Well,
I've been spending a lot of time with people in Chicago, yeah.
So I'm wondering, given the fact that that strike was just settled, what your assessment is of it, and given, if you want to deploy this framework, both, what explains its success, or maybe not being as successful as they might have expected or wanted. So what is your general assessment of it?
So I really don't have one yet because I haven't dived. I have a big one of 2012, right, which I wrote a 40-page chapter about no shortcuts and anchored my dissertation on. So I can talk a lot about the 2012 strike in great detail and each of the structure tests they did and the deliberateness of this work. So everything I just showed you was alive and well in the 2012 effort. The bits of time I had to be on the phone with people who I relied a lot on during 2012, I would say, first of all, first comment, frickin' amazing. So that's just, by my measure, I think by any measure, the Chicago teacher strike round 2 was a huge success, period. They won. There's who won, they won. And rebuilt the union again and developed tons of new leaders and, all sorts of amazing things happened. When it comes to the level of engagement with the broader community, though, I'd say that work didn't get as much attention in the last few years in Chicago as it did between 2006 and 2012. And I think it showed a little bit. They never lost the community, so that's, again, huge success. I would never say anything differently, but the bit of conversations I had, it seems to me that there's some rhetoric about bargaining for a common good, which actually I realize I'm speaking very carefully now. No one's taping, I think you're taping, people are taping me. I'm asking people to be, if you want me to talk openly, then you should not tape my things. But I think...
We're recording over here.
Yeah, I know, he knows, but he doesn't. It's the people who I don't know who are recording that I sometimes worry about them. But anyway, I think there was some more of the top-down-ish approach in this round in the community than there was the deep bottom-up work that characterized the rebuild of the union from 2007 to 2012. That's what I think. But I can't say it for sure yet. And I mean that. So that's what I think. And evidence is something I actually like. So I don't have that yet. I have some casual conversations. So it's interesting, though. And just to be honest, it wouldn't be a shock for anyone who really follows my work. But I was quoted in these Times last week saying, an article they did on the tradition of social movement unionism or how we involve the community. And I do think, one thing that happens in academia for sure, and one thing that happens for people who rely on foundation funding, okay? Two concepts. Is the need to name something as new when it's not, driven by funder prerogatives and funding available in the university and research grants, and then funding available to community-based organizations, all the same. The problem of why I'm sticking with the unions, by the way. Why I like when the workers pay my salary. For all the problems of the labor movement. I'd rather have to take my issues to a bunch of workers and the due structure. So, and not have to pretend something is new that's not new. So I think it's interesting because, there's some claiming of the mantle of this new idea, but there weren't actually, I don't believe. Again, I'm not up to the minute on it, and I'm going to take my time to get up to the minute on it, but I don't believe they achieved any of the housing demands, for example, which is what the bargaining for common good demand was. And it's not, I don't mean it as some kind of harsh criticism, because it's in the context of a huge victory. But in the nuances of how we win, and the nuances of how we're building towards a real utopia, I think that was probably the piece of the work that could have been done better. From 2007 to 2012 in Chicago, when the workers didn't have a lot of the resources of the union, and they were much more embedded in their communities, because they didn't yet control the union, they were deeply working in the broader community in their neighborhoods. And that shifted a bit to more of a union relationship to established organization relationship. And that's just different. And by the way, again, compared to most labor unions, hats off, like, good work, you know what I mean? Like, that's more than most of us are doing in the trade union movement. But it can be much better. And I think it was deeper, and broader in the first round of their strike than it was in round 2. And, yeah. And there's so few unions that are trying to deliberately build bottom-up engagement with the community. You know, I just can't even explain it. Like when you put out so much good, when people know there's a method that works and people choose not to use it, it's always astounding to me. When I went back into today I was talking about Philadelphia, sometimes I talk about Nevada, sometimes I talk about Connecticut. Like if I go back to the earliest campaigns I was running as a trade union organizer, where we were really starting to do this bottom-up approach. Let's get we're mapping the workers' relationships at work. Let's have the workers now map their relationship to the community. And then let's be systematic about how we actually engage people. Let's look for where there's more than one of them per church, more than one of them per mosque, more than one of them per whatever it was, housing complex. Let's go build a tenant union, off the rank and file workers, connections. Like, it so obviously worked, and so easily and so beautifully worked in the big campaigns that I was first running in the last century in Connecticut. And years later, I had one of the most powerful ministers called me up when I was in Nevada and said, Jane, we're having a fight again about housing. I'm like, Rev Tommy Jackson from Faith Tabernacle Baptist Choir in Stamford, Connecticut. What might you be calling me for 10 years later? And he was calling, complaining that the unions no longer were engaging with the churches in Connecticut. And so I got pissed off, and I sort of knew it was true, but it was an excuse for me to call my old leadership, and I called into my old leadership, and I'm like, why am I getting a phone call in Nevada about the lack of response to a community campaign in Connecticut? Like, why aren't you guys still doing the deliberate work that we were doing? And they were like, we don't know. These are smart people who I love. And I was like, that's so unsatisfying. Like, what the hell is, like, what kind of answer is that? And they were like, well, you're gone. And I'm like, no, that's stupid shit. Because all the organizers were doing it after me. Like, we trained generations of worker leaders and organizers, right? So, and it has a lot to do with focus. And one thing I believe as someone who's run a lot of big campaigns and just done a lot of big projects is, I always say, if you're trying to get something big done, and there isn't one person whose job is to wake up in the morning and make sure it's happening, even if that means they're involving thousands of people in the doing, I don't mean they're getting up and doing it. I mean, I call it driving a project. If there isn't one person in the morning waking up who's driving something that's considered important in whatever the effort is, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen well. This work takes focus and discipline and energy. But the great news is, like, most people can do it, right? It's just, there's methods, and they're teachable. And I've watched, organic rank and file worker leaders go on to become some of the most amazing organizers on planet Earth, because they are natural organizers. So it's then about how do they get replicable methods attached to their work? How do they learn to be a little bit more reflective on it? But the work is completely teachable. And some people will do it better than others. That's true of almost everything, right? I can't do math, just to be super clear. And I don't hold any of my teachers responsible for it. Like, don't ask me one more time about a formula or an Excel spreadsheet or how to upload a computer. There are a lot of things I can't do and shouldn't do. And there's some things I can do, right? And I think that's true of everyone. So recognizing that and then building teams around it, I think matters. See a hand there, and then a hand there, and then a hand there. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And say your name if you don't mind.
I'm Carolyn.
Hi. I knew his, so yeah.
I'm part of County Workers 1871. And one of the things we were talking about with the bottom-up development is it's not as glamorous, right? It's not as glamorous as the strike. When there's 100,000 people on the Capitol Square, and CNN's here and the news media's here, it's not as glamorous. It's harder to stay motivated for that kind of day-to-day work and that kind of connection building. And we live in a society that already people are getting disconnected. Some of the standard organizing forces in communities are going away. There is less participation in our churches and our civic organizations. Those groups are aging. Do you have thoughts on how to help sustain people with the more day-to-day and the less glamorous? Because I think some of the people that are really the heroes of this movement are people that get up and do it every day, less than the person who's, on TV. or writing a book, or
Yes.
just interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And again, like my hat's off to anyone who's sitting in the public sector in Wisconsin or anything else at this point, right? After just being like run over by a tractor 85 times. And I mean that, you know, I just feel like, I feel like about Wisconsin sometimes what I feel about what happened to the GM workers just now, which is that like the movement failed us. But anyway, something. Anyway, so approach is a great essay. If no one's ever read it, there's a great essay. It's so short, it's simple and open. It's in open access now through Cornell by Bob Mullenkamp called Organizing Never Stops. And it was just a speech he gave, but I recommend it. And he was the organizing director of 1199 when it was still the national union that I came out of years ago. He's a brilliant organizer. And that essay really sums it up. Basically, it's your approach to the day-to-day work that matters. So in Nevada, when I moved out of the blue states and into the red states, and from the comfort of union security, union shop, to the open shop, which for me was a really big and important development for me. Like personally as an organizer, it was really important for me years ago to get thrown into the open shop environment because it sharpened my work in incredibly intense ways to no longer just have workers be part of the union. And I'm glad that happened to me in 2004, not by force in 2011 or something else, right? So I somehow stupidly chose to get sent to the right to work states. So, and that's what made all of the methodological work that I had been taught, it's where I began to really seriously deepen method even more with a team of workers and a team of people. To get it like as sharp as we could get it, to get to building 90 and 95% union membership in open shop states, which is what we did. The first thing we had to do, we had to win a couple of camps, just win something. Like winning actually really matters. Like I talk about winning all the time. Like if people are doing day-to-day work and never see a victory, they're not going to stick around forever. Like you actually have to win, even if it's small. So it's like small victories really matter to people. But the big thing that we did in Nevada, which comes out of this Mullenkamp essay, it doesn't come out of it, but you see the streams of it in his little essay, little speech from 1990, was we did something, we actually had the union membership vote to change the grievance policy, and it was called From Grievances to Direct Action. And we literally moved a year-long political education discussion inside the union to shift away from traditional grievance handling and towards using structure tests, wall charts, leader ID, and direct action organizing as the primary method of how we resolve problems on the job when the boss was doing something bad. So where most unions would file a grievance, we were actually doing direct action to get immediate change in the workplace. And that is what allows for a constant series of small victories that are not sexy and on television. But the workers are actually winning, and they feel it, and the difference between having a union and not having one becomes real to them. So for me, a central question for the ongoing governance of an institution and keeping it lively and alive is one, always being strike ready. Like building strike ready unions is sort of, when I'm doing trainings now, I talk about building strike ready unions. Because if we're strike ready, it means we're constantly testing the rank and file membership to stay in good shape and to stay highly engaged. And the ongoing method of that is to shift away from traditional steward structures, traditional delegate structures, traditional grievance filing. It's union deadening, just kills the union. And constantly have people like, oh, the boss said something bad to you in the third shift. Who else cares about it? Let's go find out. Let's pass a mini petition. Like everything that I just showed you for a big organizing campaign is what we began to do to solve workplace problems. So even if we're just running a petition in one department, then the issue didn't affect anyone else. It was because they had a bad jerk third shift boss, you know? We would, I was like, what do you want? Well, the workers were like, we want this manager fired. I'm like, okay, well, that's not part of the contract, so let's think about how to do that, right? So let's start creating hell for the third shift manager. And let's start. And then we started getting a bunch of managers fired, right? We have no contractual right to get a manager fired. But if you can get to 100% unity and begin to slowly, socially take risks against the manager and make her life hell and go to the CEO every day and make his life hell and wait for the parking lot every day until it happens, like having small victories along the way with an approach to direct action organizing, to me, is the key, is like a key to how we go from unions as deadened, dulling institutions to building a much more lively, ongoing life of a trade union. And I'm happy to, if you email my silly website, which I got set up for those books, I'm happy to send it to you. Like, I've sent the document to people because we had to develop a whole document of what it meant to go from traditional grievance handling to direct action organizing. And then we wrote a new steward's manual for how to do it. Because it wasn't the same thing, just like big bargaining or open negotiations. It isn't like, oh, cool idea, let's just try it with no theory. Like, there's a lot of work behind it. So it's a real shift in the work.
Thank you. It's
Yeah.
awesome that you're going to be at Labor Couple tomorrow night, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you to the university for working on this.
Yeah, and then back here, yeah, and then you. Yeah.
David Newby, President Emeritus, Wisconsin AFL-CIO.
Sorry, what's your name?
David Newby.
Oh, hi.
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 We crossed paths a couple times.
You have?
So you started out saying that you have to have trained organizers, presumably staff organizers. And you talked in your talk, except for your last few remarks, you were talking mainly about large-scale organizing, which obviously is really important. But how do we get to scale in terms of training enough folks to be the kind of organizers you're talking about? And the parallel question is, how do we get local, state, national unions to be putting resources into training organizers of that sort so that we can have these kinds of victories on a larger scale? Then coming back to your last answer about, the worksite organizing and going from grievances to direct action to maintain that level of member involvement.
Yeah. That's definitely the $60,000 question, or maybe you'd say that's the $1 million question or something, right? And whereas before 2012, and especially before the last few years, I would be less optimistic about it. I'm actually more optimistic now based on just frankly what we're seeing, which is lots of rank and file organizers getting some training and skill from any number of places, including apparently my book and labor notes and going to seminars and learning things that their unions aren't teaching them. And they're taking over and they're rebuilding their locals. So we're seeing real bottom-up change happening right now in a way that's profound and meaningful. And in the forthcoming book, I didn't have as much time because the strike happened literally past my deadline, but I do a similar chapter that I did to the Chicago teachers chapter and their shortcuts about the LA teachers rebuild in the book that's coming out. So I start with bad union turns great, like how they do it, right? And then bad union turns great, wins amazing strike. Because it is all the methods that I'm showing you up there. And they did hire, and the point is in the beginning of it, so the rank and file teachers who were split among warring left-wing factions forever in Los Angeles, in case it sounds familiar. All the rank and filers, forget it, you know what I mean? The people of color sub, and then the Asian sub, Pacific, and then the Marxists, and then the whatever.
Right.
And then finally, hello, you're not winning, and your union's going in the ground, and you have your concession bargaining every year. So, a unity strategy is put together, which is what happened in Chicago, right, back in 2008. So, and they put together a unity thing, and they forged unity among a bunch of really good teachers, who, by the way, are really good teachers, not surprisingly. And so they can learn and they can teach. And they built a unity platform, and they won every single seat in the union in 2014, and the rest is history. So it is happening, and it's not going to happen from the top down. And for me, the learning curve of being the young organizer who went tripping into the national AFL-CIO in 1997 when I thought, woo, we took over, John Sweeney's in power, we're going to win now. And then going through the crash and realizing it's not going to work that way. It actually has to happen by workers fighting from the bottom up and changing their unions. But in both the case of Chicago and in the case of LA, and I really make a point of this in the forthcoming chapter, the very first thing that the rank and file elected leaders did in both those unions was look for experienced organizers who were trained by the same people who trained me. They understood there were a set of things they didn't know how to do. So that's why that debate that happens more in the left than anywhere else in the US. I mean, I've never met a worker who questioned why the organizer was there. They're like, thank God, Jesus, what are we supposed to do tomorrow? You know, and then like, really, I always say this debate when I get attacked by, it could be here tomorrow, wherever you are, but there are by plenty of them. Like when I get attacked by people for like the idea that we need staff, I always say it's very funny because only leftists who never organize say that to me. I've never met a worker in my life who said to me, would you send the organizers home? You know, when the union busters are firing them. So I think it's happening from the bottom up. And I think like part of why I went through this weird thing about, like I wrote the first book by accident, that's for real. I just was in Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and I was bored and I had nothing to do. So I wrote a book, Francis Washington was like, oh yeah, this is not a letter, it's a book. So then we made it a book. But, and after it came out and I began to meet all these workers who were actually reading it and like, oh shit, now I know what a sticker up is and how to do it. And like I began to realize there was some value to actually talking really openly like this about what it means to organize and what you have to do. So whether it's calling up labor notes, whether it's picking up my books, whether it's worker to worker, right, the national network being built around the education sector called CORE, like in the education sector they're kind of doing it. And it's piecemeal, and it sure would be nice if we could just unleash the resources of the national unions. But I gave up on that after I tried it the first time. And, you know, essentially was trusteed more or less basically out of my own union. So, yeah, I think it's going to take a lot of good workers getting enough skill that they can run internal elections and win their unions. And then we hope there's some place that they can turn to quickly get skilled up. And then they start to unleash the resources. So what's happening in California right now is because of the power of the UTLA, they helped the Oakland Education Association workers win their strike. And now there was huge pressure on the national union, and there's huge grant money in the NEA and the AFT, by the way, that locals are competing for, that they can get to actually hire organizers. So like when you get critical mass, you can then start to unleash some of the resources, which is very different than what we were trying to do between 1997 and 2000 when I still worked at, or 2001 when I was still at the AFL-CIO proper nationally in Washington, where we had this, you know, every local has to spend 20% on organizing, this kind of top-down edict, which just wasn't real anyway. But when workers win and take over using a lot of the same methods, look, think about internal union elections. What do you think the average participation is in an internal union election? I mean, America in general is pathetic. So, like, what do you think the percentage of workers who vote in internal union elections are?
Probably like university student elections, maybe 10%.
That's super high. Super high. So, you know, step one is figure out how to, you know, bring people into the electoral process and take over your union. And then step two is hire someone who actually knows what they're doing, which Chicago did and LA did immediately. And I walked through that story in LA. So, yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit
Who
more.
are you?
I'm good, sorry.
What's your name?
I'm Anne.
Anne, hi.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the context of the conversation that flipped that organic leader in the I forget the name of the unit, but her name was Mariah Russell or
Martin Kane.
what was the context of that conversation, and what kind of face-to-face contact and conversation caused her to change her?
Yeah. So that's probably the last one, I think. I would say several things happened. One is, a key one was when we produced the first majority petition. So back to the value of the structure tests. We made a calculation that we could win the NLRB election without that unit and without several other anti-union units. Like, we knew we had the numbers to win a simple majority vote. So we just went for it. We're going to start losing momentum, right? So a key thing you have to realize is when you're going to start losing momentum too. So we're going to start losing momentum. So we ran, when we did the first majority public structure test and paraded it all around that hospital very proudly, the workers really thought it was because I was digging in and saying we can't go do media work or press work around the demand to have them drop the legal charges against us and certify the union until you show that you're actually united in a majority. Because the CEO is running a message that a majority of nurses never voted for the union, which is technically true, right? Because in the NLRB election, you got to get a majority who shows up. So if you did the actual math on it, you know, the numbers, which I do in the book, 423 to 368, 129 non-vote. Like if you did the math, the CEO had an argument. He could credibly say, technically, a majority of the nurses in this hospital didn't vote yes for the union. Okay, well, that's not how American democracy works with the NLRB, but details. So, like, we won, fair and square, you moron. Anyway, so that didn't matter, right? I was trying to say, and the workers like, we won. And I'm like, I understand you won. And now you have to actually win, right? Which is different. So, first thing you have to do is actually get over his narrative. And you actually have to do a supermajority petition, which was very hard to do in the context of a boss running a message that there was never going to be a union there, ever. And that they were going to appeal the charges for 10 years, and you could all die before he'd certify the union, which was the message. So trying to get to flip people in that context was particularly challenging, but we did. So we did good organizing, we had a good team, we had amazing workers, and we did it. So when we showed that majority petition, the other big value it has is it helps move undecideds and antis and people sitting in the corners on the sidelines. When they suddenly realize, actually, look, most of the nurses are doing this thing, and I didn't think most of them were. So I think that that first petition had a huge effect on Marnay, for starters, because the boss argument was gone. Actually, a majority of nurses here are demanding you drop legal charges and certify the union. Most nurses wanted the union in large numbers. So I think that was crucial to it. And then it's partly that we never gave up. Like, we were on it because we understood she controlled a giant unit. And then I had kept saying to all the worker leaders in meetings, you know, you got to flip neuro, you got to flip telemetry. Like, we had several units that we had to flip to do the math of a 95% out strike vote. So I kept saying, so you want to win new staffing standards. Like, it's about issues and tying it to their issues. So your top demands are winning the best staffing standards your hospital's ever had, fixing the pension, still had one, but it was about to go. Anyway, so fixing the pension, staffing standards, whatever the issues were of the worker we were talking to, but broadly speaking, that's great. You can do it, by the way, but you have to be able to be 95% strike ready and actually be ready to walk at a 95% level. And you can't get to 95% strike threat in this hospital if Marnay Payne doesn't move. So she's in between you and your pension and you and your staffing standards, not your CEO at this point, right? So it's like a very deliberative, honest conversation about what it's going to take for you to win. And for me as an organizer, one thing I definitely was taught by my mentors was like, just treat the workers like grown-ups and be super honest all the time, which is all I know how to do, right? So it was like a simple math formula. Like, we would come in big meetings, all the wall charts are up, and I'd be like, okay, I see neuro isn't moving and telemetry looks like crap, and so let's figure it out. What are we doing? And then we would start all over again with who knows who knows who knows who among them and who's going to go make what move and ask. And we just did it endlessly until we began to crack into the units. Like, who could get to Marnay within that unit who had an associational relationship with her, who wasn't scared enough to her to confront her, because she could be pretty nasty, she'd finger out, scream at us, whatever. Super nasty. And she lets me call her super nasty in the book, because she knows she was, and she apologized in the end. But anyway, she was really dug into her position. The bigger lessons about her, too, are like, how do you let her come back in? Because that gets very interesting, right? How do you allow them to actually change their identity? But so the context was the petition, I believe, and then that we never gave up. And then we did a tactical move where I asked the president of the union to do something that would seem like below her pay grade or just not normal, to actually get on the phone and call through the entire telemetry unit. And it had to happen in like 1 hour from her cell phone, not at the office, non-traceable, and start calling into the unit and say to every single person we had a phone number for, there's like a tactical level, literally. Like, you know, you start getting desperate, like, what can we do next? And we wrote a script and worked on it with Patty, who was the president of the union, the rank and file nurse leader for a different hospital, and she called into every single phone number we had in telemetry fast one day, right at shift change, and said, Pat and Patty Aiken calling from the union to let you know that we're actually going to the bargaining table, and all the rest of the hospital nurses are going to make the decisions, all the decisions about telemetry, because none of you were there. Is that okay with you? And then she'd go to the next phone call. So we wrote a very careful script that basically showed them, you know, frame the hard choice. Cool with you? You want to keep being jerks and not participate in the process? Go ahead. And we're going to decide what your shifts are, what your overtime is going to be. No problem. As long as telemetry is cool with all the other nurses making the decisions, have at it. And that did it. But it was in the context of a lot of other work that we had done. But framing the hard choice and that was honest. Patty was like, am I really saying this? And I'm like, hell yeah, right? Like, you're going to make it really clear. You can choose not to participate. Don't complain about your contract later, because we're going to make all the decisions for you, because you're not stepping up to make your own. And that got Pat Graves, that got 2 other nurses from that unit to agree to come to a meeting, not Marnay. They didn't even ask Marnay. They were still too scared to ask her at that point. And then I asked the other worker leaders to take the draft contract, and the worker leaders, this happens a lot, again, were like fighting me. They were like, no, we can't give them, they're not even involved, you can't give them the draft contract, but we weren't at negotiations yet. And so I said, why not? Like, the boss is going to see the contract when we open up negotiations in 3 weeks. Like, what's the trade secret? You're demanding a lot of stuff. The boss knows you're going to come to negotiations. I think showing them that we believe in them and that we want them to actually read the details of the contract before it's been released is going to show that we have faith in their unit, right, despite the hostility. So it was a whole series of steps, like small steps in the context of majority petition and the big steps, and sticking to the discipline of not giving up. And she became a member of the executive board of the union. So she's a great example of why I don't write people off in the progressive movement, in the whole country. I just don't write them off. Because I think we need to be talking with them. So I think that's it. We've had some people have to go, and it's just that perfect time, 5:20 something. So I want to thank John for the opening. I want to thank Patrick and Peter and Sarah and all the lovely people I've met already here for all the nice things they're doing, and for letting me come here and bear the name of a fellow of the Havens Right Fellowship, which is a beautiful thing. And there is a lot of relationship between a lot of Eric's early work, I think, and the work I've done and do. So thanks for coming.